So, today on the podcast, we're going to explore the ins and outs of one of those big announcements made by Disney just over a week ago. Basically, Monsters and Muppets over at Hollywood Studios. Probably most of you have already heard the big news. The Muppets Courtyard will go away to make room for Monsters Incorporated Land at the studios, or as I still call the park in my mind, Disney MGM. Also, big changes are coming to Rock and Roller Coaster, with some of the Muppets moving over there. Those are the basics of the plan. But today, we'll get down into the weeds and explore what has been announced and what this means, and what the new artwork suggests or reveals. And I'll put this up front. I think what we really have are two partial announcements that discuss key aspects of a larger plan that hasn't yet been fully revealed. And the elements that are being announced now are being offered likely ahead of permit filings. So I think what we have are two announcements that reveal a little, but purposefully conceal other elements, or at least that's my take after looking at the artwork, talking to a couple of people, and then considering how these announcements were worded in the release. So, we've got some interesting things to explore today. Let's get started. Back in August, here on the podcast, we talked about how some of the artwork that was released at the D23 event for the Monsters Incorporated Land at Disney's Hollywood Studios matched the architecture and hardscape designs for the Grand Avenue and Muppet Courtyard section of that park. There was also another piece of artwork that didn't match these designs and material patterns, but we pointed out at the very least that Disney was strongly considering the Muppet Courtyard as the place for the Monsters Incorporated Land, though nothing yet had been finalized. Also here on the podcast, we speculated that the announcement about the closure of Muppet Vision 3D, if things in fact went that way, would be the least disruptive if it also came with an announcement about where the Muppets would be rehomed at the resort. Likewise, 3 months ago, we speculated that one of the areas needing some type of update was Rock and Roller Coaster, especially as the attraction's stars, Aerosmith, no longer tour nor release any new material. Aside from various greatest hits compilations, they haven't released an album of new material in a couple of decades. For years, it's been clear that Disney has understood the primary two problems around updating coaster talent. First, putting in a new performer or act requires a large chunk of money to license those song rights, also to pay performers to appear. Second, it's nearly impossible to make this approach future-proof. Aerosmith over their careers sold over 150 million albums, with nearly 30 singles becoming radio play hits. In the late 1990s, when the ride was designed and opened, they were absolutely huge, one of the largest acts in the world. But 25 years later, they're no longer the center of the music business. I know this next observation will be anathema to some listening. But if you started a redo of this attraction with the world's most popular performer today, which would be Taylor Swift, in 25 or 26 years, and that would be 2050, there's a pretty good chance that after a very long career, the music world might have moved on to new performers and new music styles. I will say, though, that my hypothetical situation of putting Taylor Swift into this attraction is a million times better than an actual Disney idea from about 15 years ago to put a Disney-managed band, specifically the Jonas Brothers, into the attraction, as their first 3 albums had been released by Disney's Hollywood Records, which would have substantially limited licensing fees. But these two attraction areas now have a shared solution with some interesting fallout. First of all, the Muppet Courtyard and Muppet Vision 3D will close in the near future so that the area can be transformed into Monstropolis. And some Muppet characters will become the new talent on Rock and Roller Coaster, specifically Dr. Teeth and Electric Mayhem. All signs, at least right now, point to a similar plot structure as exists on the current ride. Basically, Electric Mayhem needs to get somewhere in a hurry. The wording of the announcement suggests that they need to get to a music festival, and we as superfans get to ride along in the superstretch with them. Or at least that's my general take based on the poster and some official announcements. And I should point out that, at least somewhat similar to Aerosmith, I'm not sure that the vast majority of kids know exactly who Electric Mayhem is either, even after the Disney Plus miniseries, but at least Disney has the possibility of creating new content that features them. But more to the point, with a 48-inch height requirement for this coaster, are kids even the target audience here? And I would expect somewhere in this attraction, especially early on, that film portions will lean heavily on Kermit and Piggy, who are far more recognizable characters for both young and old visitors. There's no closing date yet for the Muppet Courtyard, but we can make some reasonable assumptions about the timeline. Disney's announcement to close the Muppet area almost surely is being made now because WDI is about to submit permits to the Water Management District and other agencies to set up demos, staging areas, and early construction. These permits are usually the first official sign that work is about to move forward, and as they are submitted to government agencies, they're visible to the public. You only need to look over at the Disney DVC Lodge that's being built by Fort Wilderness to know how this information loop works. Land use plans are submitted to the Water Management District, which have just enough information in them so that observant fans can thoughtfully connect the dots before Disney has made an official announcement to the public. Simply, for large, somewhat contentious projects like this, it's far better if Disney controls the message rather than superfans sorting through filed permits. So the permits are the first element that define a work timeline toward new construction. If those permits get filed in the next month or maybe in January, we can chart out a likely starting timeline. For the sake of comparison, the first wave of permits for the Tropical Americas area over at Animal Kingdom were filed in May with the second set in July. Initially, Disney said that work on the Tropical Americas project would begin fall 2024, but the first phase of work in that park won't begin until January 13th, even though some work has started backstage. That is about 8 months from the first permit filed to the time that some areas in the park begin to close. I would assume that the timeline here will be similar. My guess we'll see visible work on Monstropolis begin next summer. It's possible that Disney might first start work with the Door Coaster show building, which will be located on what is now backstage areas and a parking lot just outside the park. If that happens, the Muppet Courtyard might have another year or maybe even a little more. But if Disney begins work on the land and the ride at roughly the same time, this timeline suggests that the Muppet Courtyard could close next summer. And if I had to be a little more specific, I'd say that Disney is more likely to extend the closing timeline to the end of the summer season than to close that area at the start of summer. But again, that's all speculation on my part. Also, again, the work on this land might be phased, with the most complex work beginning backstage. In fact, I see one scenario where Muppet Vision could stay open for a while, as the theater will remain here once it's Monstropolis, and it's possible to wall off nearly everything else in the courtyard while still giving guests access to the theater, which is at the very front of the Muppet Courtyard. But if there's a complete closure to globally work on the new land, I think guests have likely until next summer to see the Muppet salute to all nations, but mostly to America, one more time. But beyond this closing timeline, there are a number of issues swirling around this announcement, both expressed and sort of hidden. First of all, Disney seems to understand that it needs to move cautiously and carefully with Muppet Vision, as it was the final Muppet project on which Jim Henson worked before his untimely death in 1990. And beyond concerns of Muppet fans, Disney still owns and works with Muppet Studios, which creates content for films, Disney Plus, and the parks, and no doubt Disney wants employees there to feel that their founder, Jim Henson, is being respected and honored in all of these changes. The official Disney statement is this: "We are having creative conversations and exploring ways to preserve the film and other parts of the experience for fans to enjoy in the future." And the key part of that announcement is this: other parts of the experience. Disney can easily shift Muppet Vision over to Disney Plus to preserve the film, or even a 3D platform like those supported by Apple or Meta. But the word experiences suggests perhaps something more. Muppet Vision beyond the 3D elements has animatronics in theater effects, and even a costume performer playing a live Muppet in real time. Beyond the concerns about Henson's legacy, there are a number of other issues swirling around all of this. We'll work through this bit by bit. Let's start with the newly released artwork, which is a bird's eye presentation of the re-themed Monsters Courtyard, showing some buildings removed and a new area at the back of the current courtyard where Disney will place the door coaster. To be clear here, as with the Tropical Americas project, Disney is leaving many buildings in place and simply re-theming them, which will shorten the construction timeline. The entire coaster structure and queue, though, will be new. One interesting thing here is that the newly built ice-cold hydraulics building, which is a permanent structure at the front of Muppets Courtyard, isn't in this newly released artwork at all. This structure opened only this past February. It's a solid building and took many months to build. It's not like movable festival structures over at Epcot. If you haven't seen this yet, and since it's only been there for 9 months, there's a good chance you haven't, it's a tall building. It's maybe 16 feet tall, with a brick, stucco, and tile exterior that sells Coke products and snacks at 2 walk-up windows shaded by awnings. I can't imagine that this building is going anywhere. It's possible the building was removed in the art to create a clean sightline to the land's entrance, but that would be a little bit unusual. So what I think this says to me is that the artwork that we're seeing now for the Monsters Incorporated land has been around for a long time, perhaps even a few years, before that ice-cold hydraulic structure was ever built. And the updates in the art are only to the Monsters area itself. So in this, as we move forward, you should keep in mind that there may be some other small elements that reflect an older concept of what might actually go here. Early concept art conveys the essence of an area, not so much an exact plot plan. But in terms of what we have in the art, let's continue with this. There is a very noticeable billboard on the left side of the land for the laugh floor, but this could just be a placeholder for some other design, or perhaps even a promotion for the laugh floor that's currently located in the Magic Kingdom. To be clear, I doubt this means that the laugh floor is moving from the Magic Kingdom over to the studios. The attraction is now nearly 18 years old and feels a little dated. That is, this screen-centered attraction is probably not worth the cost to move unless it is substantially updated. But admittedly, with the billboard there's a small chance, and I would say only a small chance, that there will be an effort to group all Monsters Incorporated elements into one themed area. But my gut feeling here is that it would simply be better to create new supporting attractions for the area, as that would make the whole courtyard feel fresh and tied to the contemporary moment. But then again, maybe this is a small suggestion that Mike and Buddy Boyle's new home will be in Hollywood Studios. After all, Laugh Floor is a very portable basic theater show that is focused on screens. I'm not sure this would be the best move, or even the intended move, but one of the most easily identifiable elements in this new artwork is the sign with Mike Wazowski featuring the laugh floor. Imagineers knew by placing that sign here, people would wonder what it meant. If it does move over to Hollywood Studios, hopefully it has some large improvements beyond the existing screens. This billboard attached to the top of some buildings is not far from where Mama Melrose now stands. The Disney Parks blog, in its official announcement, explained that in addition to the door coaster, there would be, and here let me quote this, a whole new theater show. Now I can't imagine that the laugh floor, even with some improvements, would be described as whole new. But in the revised artwork, the theater that now houses Muppet Vision 3D is still there. Its marquee, which may be partially covered, says Monstro, as in the Monstro Theater. But I'm guessing some letters may be covered, which would make this the Monstropolis Theater. Or maybe Monstro is simply short for Monstropolis in the current plans? Maybe it's just a bit of design laziness, as Muppets and Monstro have the same number of letters, so it was easy to swap out one word for the other. But if that's the case, give WDI 2 weeks to figure out that the demonic whale in Pinocchio was also called Monstro, which will create some confusion among fans. Anyway, the theater is still there with minimal exterior changes. If you zoom in on the entrance, you will find the words Late Night Screams listed on both sides of the current marquee, right where the title Muppet Vision 3D is now placed in real life. So maybe that's a clue as to what's going in there. And beyond this, out in front of the theater, instead of the water fountain where the amazing Miss Piggy rises like the Statue of Liberty, is a new fountain structure featuring a big eyeball. In terms of basic structures and existing buildings, the right side of the current Muppet Courtyard appears to stay the same, the theater and then the shops. The left half keeps the structures for the Royal Flush bathrooms and for Rizzo's Pizza, though clearly the themes here will change. The shop areas, though, such as the old Christmas store, which have been closed since COVID and even have been used for storage, will be demoed. This will create more of an open walkway that leads to what is now that backstage area where the coaster will be built. Essentially, the dead end of the current Muppet Courtyard will now move into a new space where the suspended door coaster will be housed. Also, back there not far from the current location of Mama Melrose will be the themed Harryhausen restaurant. The theme and overall play environment of this restaurant will clearly appeal to kids. In the movie, Harryhausen's is a sushi restaurant. Its logo is a set of chopsticks arranged around an eye. But I'm not so sure the restaurant's menu offerings as presented in the film will appeal to kids. So clearly there's some inventive menu work that needs to be done here to make it more kid-friendly. I have trouble getting my kids now, who are in high school, to try a dragon roll. And this would have been impossible back when they were 5. So some version of Sushi McNuggets or something like that needs to be figured into this menu selection as well. Anyway, the show building for the coaster is back beyond the current courtyard on land that is now mostly used for parking and for a service road. Perhaps this will make the construction timeline a little more guest-friendly. Work has the possibility of beginning on the coaster area without substantial demo inside the existing courtyard. That is, the new structures and the ride system will be at the back of the courtyard, so there's that possibility that Muppet Vision at the front of the courtyard can have a very slow countdown to closure. Something that's not included in this artwork is this. That parking area where the door coaster will be built is fairly large, far larger than needed for the door coaster building and queue. So there will be a good bit of space left to expand just to the left of that new coaster. The height requirement not yet announced for this coaster is going to leave out a lot of younger kids, which will be a problem. So as I look around aerial photos, I can see that there's the possibility of adding in some other attraction. Beyond that new theater show, maybe a dark ride of sorts or even a flat ride that would be available to families with younger kids. Again, this is only speculation. But just to point out the obvious, Hollywood Studios is home to some of the most recent Disney characters, which also means characters that appeal to younger viewers. And to create a land that primarily excludes them would be a mistake. So I half expect some later information as to how this Monsters Land will speak to them, much in the same way that Toy Story Land has one coaster and 2 other attractions for the entire family. And this leads us to that other announcement, that some of the Muppets will take over the role of host at Rock and Roller Coaster. And this seems a little trickier than moving monsters into the existing Muppet courtyard. The identity of the Muppets and their type of humor fits well with Muppet Vision 3D. The Muppets rely a lot on visual slapstick and the type of vocal comedy that once defined radio sitcoms. Both of those types can be presented well on a screen or in a stage show. Their humor is personality-driven, not thrill-driven. In terms of Rock and Roller Coaster, the Muppets' comedic strengths, ironically, would be more on display in the video pre-show section than on the thrill ride itself. It would be kind of hard to have slapstick and witty repartee on a coaster that goes nearly 60 miles an hour. I imagine that some songs will have integrated elements of humor, perhaps mayhem classics such as Can You Picture This? And Moving Right Along, with the overdub of animals screaming to the twists of the coaster and Dr. Teeth saying that this left turn was a bad idea. I can also see a scenario where the Muppets perform popular songs with current pop stars. Dr. Teeth and Dua Lipa, or Dr. Teeth and Billie Eilish, and maybe these songs rotate randomly on the ride like songs presently do on Cosmic Rewind. And then in 10 years, when a new crop of pop stars dominates the music landscape, Disney can simply then record a new set of tunes with the then current stars as the soundtrack for this coaster as guests zoom off towards the festival. This would be a low-cost upgrade to keep the attraction relevant to a contemporary audience, much like how updates are presently added to Star Tours. If Disney had a number of performances, let's say 6 or 8 with different pop stars, it would also be a way to remove one performance if a performer stepped too far out of the image that Disney wanted to project. In this, a certain issue with Paul Rubens comes to mind from many years ago. If I had to take a guess, I would say that the announcements for the coaster specifically are minimal, and likely tied to changes that would have been revealed in upcoming permit filings. Clearly, the exterior ornamentation of the current building, the pre-show area, and some overall theming will need to be changed, and maybe some of the surrounding space will need to be changed as well. One of the unusual elements to this plan is that the most famous Muppets are not heavily featured in the material for the revised Rock and Roller Coaster. In the world of the Muppets, the storyline for Electric Mayhem is mostly distinct from that of the core Muppets. Sure, Kermit and Piggy are on this new poster, and they will probably appear in the attraction, but they are not the focus here. Beyond this, there's no mention so far of Fozzie Bear, Statler and Waldorf, the Swedish Chef, Gonzo, Beaker, Ralph, Sam the Eagle, and so on. I'd say there's pretty clearly at least one, if not 2 more announcements related to this reorganization of the park in terms of presenting the Muppets. Disney likes to string out announcements to keep a constant focus on resort projects, but I would be very surprised that if by this time next year, maybe at that Destination D in 2025, we don't have a little more as to what has been planned so far concerning the Muppets and Hollywood Studios. Again, here are some observations. The Muppets presently are moving from a family-friendly theater show to a launch coaster with loops, which has the highest height requirement of any coaster at Disney World, which is 48 inches. This means that most kids under the age of 8 or 9 won't be tall enough to ride it. On the upside, the Electric Mayhem can probably lean a little bit more into older humor on this attraction, but this means that there is now no attraction presently set up for younger kids who are a large part of the intended audience for the Muppets. So, first of all, expect an announcement of an attraction or a show or an installation that will speak to this issue. Also, a show or an attraction more focused on key Muppets such as Kermit, Piggy, Fozzie, Dr. Honeydew, Beaker, and so on. And with this, there's one other element of the Muppet move from their current courtyard to the end of Sunset Boulevard that sorely sticks out, which is that Sunset Theater, which is very close to Rock and Roller Coaster. In 2025, Disney will put a villain show into this black box space with live actors and screens. This almost surely, as we have discussed, is a test to see how theme park fans react to certain characters as WDI slowly pieces together their plans for the Villains Land over at the Magic Kingdom. Also, this Villains offering, in what I assume to be a temporary show of maybe 2 or 3 years, will be the first time in a while that Hollywood Studios has focused a new attraction on classic Walt-era Disney characters. Classic Disney characters do show up in Fantasmic, but aside from that, most attractions in the park veer away from classic Disney elements, which are celebrated over at the Magic Kingdom. Hollywood Studios tends to focus on non-Disney characters and also on fairly recent Disney offerings, typically from the late 1980s onward. Lucasfilm has the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular, Star Tours, and Galaxy's Edge. Pixar has Toy Story Land, as well as various other offerings tied to The Incredibles and other films. The Muppets, at least for now, have a courtyard, and some of those Muppets are also being moved across the park. Even those elements tied to the Disney Animation Studio are more contemporary. Frozen and the Paul Ruddish version of Mickey Mouse from the recent shorts, and so on. The classic Disney characters such as Hook, Maleficent, Cruella, and so on simply don't fit this identity. I'd say that the key Disney vibe of Hollywood Studios starts with the 1989 version of The Little Mermaid and then moves on to Beauty and the Beast and then onward, with Indy, Kylo Ren, and Kermit thrown in. So I expect this villain show in the Sunset Theater, which leans far more towards classic characters, to be a temporary offering. And then after a couple of years, once Disney has all the data it needs to plan that Villains Land, the big question will be, what then goes into Sunset Theater? Again, I would suggest that whatever is added here helps build the park out in terms of its newer identity of mini-land concepts, such as Galaxy's Edge, Toy Story Land, Monsters Incorporated Land, and so on, and also be something that would serve a younger audience. So one possibility here is a revised and maybe reduced version of Muppet Vision 3D, showing up in this Sunset Boulevard Theater space. Remember, Disney has already said that they are exploring ways to preserve the film and other parts of the experience. So if they want to preserve the film and other parts of the experience, the black box space of the Sunset Theater would give them space in the park to do this. And it would also start to create a larger Muppets area over there. Let me add in a little more about this. My gut sense is that Muppet Vision isn't enough of an anchor to fully occupy that space to meet capacity expectations. The 500-seat Muppet Vision Theater that's currently there in recent years has rarely filled the capacity. So maybe in the future, if Muppet Vision actually goes into the Sunset Theater, maybe there's both a new film and the existing Muppet Vision 3D film that move into this space with alternating showtimes, much like how two films now play in the France Pavilion. But then again, to absorb a little bit of cynicism, maybe that recent announcement to consider how to preserve elements of the experience was simply a way to quiet down some disgruntled fans, with the film simply showing up on Disney Plus when the courtyard closes, and likely after at least one more Muppet project is announced for Disney World. So as we move into the final part of the episode, I have a few other observations to add about all of this. We are starting to see the organizational pieces of the revamped Hollywood studios come together. Most new additions create small lands around a single IP, Star Wars, Toy Story, Monsters, Muppets, and so on. And in this reorganization, the one area that clearly needs a new identity is the animation courtyard and the launch bay complex, which together are mostly stores, unused space, black box theaters that can be used for various and changing entertainment, such as for Disney Junior. And just beyond the animation courtyard are back of the house areas and offices. That is, this part of the park can become another big expansion area, so that the overall park has a constant identity. It's almost a surety that the animation courtyard will be at some point redesigned with a common theme related to one movie IP, and again a fairly recent IP. I think that if a Zootopia area, if built in America, likely belongs over at Animal Kingdom. Cars would have been a really good pick, but that's going to the Magic Kingdom. But that still leaves properties like The Incredibles, which will soon have a third film, and Marvel properties that Disney can use in Florida. And admittedly, the MCU characters that can presently be used in Florida is a very small group. But here's another observation of what's happening in other areas of Disney. The MCU is clearly setting up the Young Avengers, which includes Hawkeye's protege, Kate Bishop, Captain Marvel's protege, Miss Marvel, the Scarlet Witch's sons, Wiccan, and likely Speed, America Chavez, Ironheart, and Ant-Man's daughter, Cassie Lang. There are also some rumors that Viv, who is Vision's synthetic daughter in recent comics, might be part of the upcoming Young Avengers mix as well. If I had to take a guess, I would say one of the yet unannounced goals for the shift to the Young Avengers, in addition to developing characters that will relate well to younger viewers and also use less expensive actors, is also to create a cast of superheroes who together, or at least mostly together, could then move into the Florida resort. I'm sure that there's a legal test to determine how strongly these younger characters are connected to the family of Marvel characters at Universal, but I suspect that many of these would pass that test. In the MCU right now, we're still seeing the origins and setup stories for most of these Young Avengers characters. But if all works well with this, it gives Disney the opportunity to create something like a Young Avengers campus that is able to maneuver around character limitations that they cannot use at Disney World due to a long-standing licensing agreement with Universal that predates the Disney purchase of Marvel. For this Young Avengers campus, you can also add in a small number of older characters that Disney can use in Florida, as they don't strongly connect to the character groups at Universal. On this list, maybe, would be the Guardians, including Groot and Rocket, Doctor Strange, She-Hulk, Deadpool, and perhaps one or two others. If I had to pick a couple of things that I would say are most likely for the animation courtyard, I would pick either The Incredibles, which continues with film developments, or an arrangement of Marvel characters that Disney can use in Florida, such as some or most of the Young Avengers. But of course, all of that would depend on how popular the Young Avengers films and series become. And so far it's been a little hit and miss, but maybe once the narrative direction here is better established, the Young Avengers project will pick up a little steam. Next, all of the elements that we've discussed so far today will require demo, construction, new media, and/or significant retheming. Another thing you can count on is that as Universal opens Epic Universe, Disney will lean pretty heavily on the only park division that can move quickly, which is their entertainment division. I'm suspecting a line of entertainment-related announcements over the next year or two. Everything from parades, live shows, projection shows, new fireworks, possibly even some drone shows inside a park. I believe that Animal Kingdom has a water stage area where drones could be deployed as safely as they were at Disney Springs last summer. Add into this, I wouldn't be at all surprised if there was some sort of stage show or roaming park experience featuring the Muppets, maybe even somewhat similar to that Muppet-centered stage show at Jollywood Nights, to keep the Muppets featured in the park, especially if there's a gap between the closing of Muppet Vision 3D and the opening of the Electric Mayhem version of Rock and Roller Coaster. But this is generally the path we're on until 2027. As Universal opens Epic Universe, Disney World will lean into attraction rethemes which can be completed quickly, such as Tiana's Country Bear the Zootopia show in the Tree of Life, Test Track 3.0, and a new rock and roller coaster with Electric Mayhem. I should probably toss in that Indy is replacing Dinosaur, but that won't open until Tropical Americas is finished. Anyway, with the exception of Indy, these types of rethemes give Disney World something that they can present as new attractions as a way of anchoring advertising and driving visitation in the next 2 or so years. Disney can also focus on entertainment offerings, which also can be developed typically in under a year. These are Disney World's best defense now against a growing Universal resort until Disney development plans produce actual new attractions and actual new lands. So I would expect some more entertainment offerings to perk up at Disney as construction teams get ready to move into 3 of the 4 parks, Magic Kingdom, Animal Kingdom, and the studios, to build entirely new lands that will open a few years from now. From an operational standpoint, I think it would be ideal if Rock and Roller Coaster could be updated for the Muppets before the Muppets courtyard is completely closed, as closing the coaster and Muppet Vision at the same time reduces a lot of capacity from the studios and also removes 2 significant attractions at the same time. Construction is set to begin in 2025 on the Monsters area. Again, perhaps this begins with the show building and the new coaster, which at the moment is all backstage, leaving the Muppet Courtyard open a little bit longer. But I'm not sure that that is the path we're going down. I think there will be an all-hands-on-deck effort to add attractions, new dining and shops as quickly as possible as Universal begins to walk out Epic Universe in the middle of next year. So at the moment, I think we are all on one big countdown for the closing of Muppet Vision, at least as the show exists in its current location. But also, I think you have at least a good chunk of 2025 to take in Kermit, Piggy Gonzo, Waldo, Bean, and the rest of them before they are evicted from their current theater and head then to parts unknown. I'll be back next Sunday with a new episode. We still have some news to explore. Also, we need to move our story about Disney legend Mary Blair forward. And now that Thanksgiving is behind us and we're into December, I'll post up some of our holiday stories midweek. And that generally is our plan here for December. Lastly, as you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We do just 2 things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and the parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. We are funded entirely by listener contributions, specifically by listeners who join us over on Bandcamp as monthly subscribers. On Bandcamp, you will find over 300 episodes not available on iTunes or anywhere else. But the best reason to join us there is to support the work we do here and to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can support us by becoming a monthly subscriber at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in our show notes. So, until next Sunday, this is Todd James Pierce.